adventure and intrigue. Fighting monsters out of our league. We'll roll the dice and pray they're nice. A +2 and I might succeed. Whether Cthulhu or D&D, or what's on drive-through RPG. I'll roll the dice and pray they're nice. A critical I could really need.
Well, hello, everybody. Hello. This is Carl with Tabletop Tango. I'm doing something a little bit different, and I don't know, maybe it's crazy, but I was going back through some old files and I found my GenCon 2003 or 4 seminar I did on taking your campaign adventure to a convention format. So obviously people have long-running campaigns with lots of adventures, and occasionally you run into something and you go, wow, that's really, really cool. I think other people would enjoy it. I would love to present this at a convention so that others could leverage it. And I did, way back in the day, I did a seminar where I talked about how you could take those adventures and turn them into something that made sense for a convention. Because obviously an adventure you have that you wrote that takes a couple of sessions, requires, uses the character's backstory and all those sorts of things to make it interesting, doesn't necessarily play well for a convention format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this presentation, and it's going to look a little dated because it is from like 2003 and 4, and I look a little dated. I look a little more handsomer at a younger age perhaps, but it'd be interesting just to go through it. It has great ideas, even though the presentation's maybe a little dated in its format. The content is still very much applicable today. So hopefully you find that useful. So let's go ahead and shift that over to the presentation. And here it is. From campaign to convention, building compelling convention events based on your favorite campaign memories. And so I'll go through this and let's see what we learn. It should be very interesting. So let's go and get over here. So my agenda, what will I go through? Well, I'm going to go through how it starts, what are then things that make you want to do this, how you build the adventure, what makes sense to change, modify, and then what it takes to run at the con. So let's talk about a campaign versus a convention. Well, so in a campaign, we see there's this threads of adventures, and the party grows from that first level characters to nth level characters, and somewhere in between, when you were doing an adventure, you have that incredible thing that everybody now says, hey, you remember that time that we fought the dragon in the Tower of High Sorcery with, yada, 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 and it's like, wow, that would be fun. Everybody would love that. But the reality is this is part of a long-running campaign. So we've got to be careful how we design it and what we do to implement it. So what's the difference? So from a campaign, it's long-term. So you have a shared backstory. The characters have been together for a long time. You know your players. You know how they work. I'm not talking characters. I'm talking to players. You understand how they think, and what they're going to do from the story standpoint, even before it begins. The story builds. You have this climactic arc that goes on. So it might be many adventures all building up to a single story, and that single story is now very, very exciting. You have PC investment. Everybody is invested in the game already. And then there's the PC intimacy. The characters, the players, everybody knows what they have. They understand. And I use the example from like Dragonlance. I know I have that in my pouch. It's not somebody who's just got the piece of paper. So what's the difference from a con? Well, a con you got, and a lot of them in America, and it changes around the world, I guess. There are different lengths. But in America, you got maybe 3:45 to 4 hours at the max. So you've got to get right into the adventure right away. So the shared backstory folding in gradually just won't happen. It's got to be standalone, self-contained. You need that payoff right then, at the end of the adventure. It can't be to be continued or or it requires some understanding of the story before you get there, and that's pretty intuitive. And then the PC is just a piece of paper to the folks who are coming to the convention. So you need to make sure that they understand what's on their sheet. It's easy to use. And so why is that important? Because again, that PC intimacy, that, so-and-so has this particular item, and this particular item is the important part of this adventure. They collected it 10 adventures ago, and now here's the payoff. That's really tough for somebody who's just coming in. So keep going. So what's the goals? Why do we even want to do this? We want it to be memorable. We want to have something that everyone participates in. Everyone's having a good time. In your campaign adventure, this might have been a real fun one, but maybe the thief didn't have a lot to do, but that's okay because he had a lot more to do in the next adventure or the previous adventure. For a convention, you want everyone to really participate and have a good time. You want to have a great payoff, obviously. This isn't just one string of a minor adventure within a larger arc. It's something that needs to stand alone. And of course, fun, obviously. That goes without saying. And one of the things that's maybe not really the idea between a campaign to a con is that a gimmick is not necessarily a good adventure. You can have a great gimmick. It might be something really fun, but if you can't build a compelling story around it, it's just a gimmick and it won't fly. And I've done that. I've had con events, Dragomon, got to catch them all, and the whole concept was kind of a Pokemon for D&D, and did it fail miserably because it was a cool gimmick. People, really thought it was a great idea, but man, the execution sucked. And so you got to be careful. Now, when we start talking about building the adventure, how do we put this story together? Do we use fixed locations where a character can kind of wander off or they can short circuit? So, you've got the classic dungeon delve where you've got 50 rooms. Are you going to expect the characters to climb through every room, or are there ways for them to, when time is running short circuit the process and get to where they need to go? And can it stand alone? So look at your adventure, and I mentioned this before. How much insider knowledge, how much backstory, all that's got to get carved out to make this adventure just the adventure itself. Doesn't mean you can't use those names and some of that cool stuff that you had. It just means it really has to stand alone. So evaluate it. Again, there's different people, and we want everybody to have fun. So can we rejigger our adventure a little bit to handle the different play styles? The hack and slashers, those who like to just cast a fireball into the middle of a room. How do they all play together in your adventure? Now, that doesn't mean you have to always handle all play styles, because your adventure may be really designed for one. Well, make sure in your description of your event for the con, that's clear. But otherwise, you want to have something that's a little bit of everything in it, just for folks to have fun. How long is it? Man, one of the big things about cons is every player group is different. They have different pacing. Some will spend an hour on the tavern before they ever leave, and others will be just burning through your content really fast. And so, you have to think about the different pacing. So do I have things that are there when the players are moving too fast? Can I cut things out when they're moving too slow? I've got a slot, and I don't want to get to a point where half the adventure hasn't even been touched yet because the players didn't get there and they don't get that payoff. And one of the things that's important is it sufficiently play tested. Your campaign adventure that you're turning into a con adventure does not count as play testing. It just doesn't, because you're changing it, you're modifying it. Even if you're using the same character sheets, you're using the same location names, it's a different beast. And that's the whole point of this seminar. So what's this is a little dated as far as content goes. A lot of people were using very fixed locations back in the day, but the idea of, multiple, sequence of encounters now versus I've got a dungeon and there's a bunch of places and you can go to them in any order. And when you get there, it may or may not be a good thing. And so, the problem is, can they bypass things? What happens if they get stuck? What if they can't solve the puzzle? You have to be able to support that that play in your adventure, in the con, because your players in your campaign who get stuck on a puzzle, well, they're gonna go away, do something else, later come back, go talk to the mage, figure these things out. In the campaign or in the convention, folks don't have that luxury. So consider event-based adventures. Keep the fun parts, kind of eliminate all the, here's an empty room, who cares? It gives the players some slack, because if they miss something, you can slot it back in, or maybe you just skip it because it's not important and you bring that element into another scene that they're going to be part of. It also makes it easier to trim it. Or expand it. So I write adventures for conventions. Often I have multiple ways of doing things. I have things I can cut in, like they're moving quickly through. One of the things I had was an adventure called the Helix Nebula Situation, which was a set of robots that were trying to save a generation ship that had sort of, hit something in a nebula and was now stalled and stopped. In that adventure, I made it so that if it looked like they were going to be moving through certain areas and not trying to do certain things, that I could handle that. There would be additional pieces later on that would slow them down or add new challenges, just so they would get more out of the event and weren't just going straight through. Or they were running really slow. I had it so there was a little bit of a clue in the science lab and a little bit of clue in the med lab. And if they just weren't going to go to the science lab and they spent all their time screwing around in the med lab, maybe it's time to give them that clue there as well, because, it could conceivably be there anyway. There's not a lot of difference between medical and science as far as, they got microscopes, they got samples. So think about that. I mentioned this a bunch of times about making a standalone. You need all the elements of a great story: setup, the launch, the story, the climax, resolution. All of that has to be done in that 3 and 3/4 hours, 4 hours. It can't be, this adventure is really kind of defining the backstory with some role playing, and the characters don't really get through the entirety of sort of an emotional roller coaster you want to put them on. Some little things that I talk a little bit about all the time when I'm doing a convention game. I started running convention games back in GenCon in the 90s because people weren't doing some of these things. I was paying to play these games and people weren't showing up, or the GM wouldn't show up, or the GM wouldn't try to make it fun. It was like, some kind of pet project where they were just trying to see how many PCs they could kill, or they were just trying to show how smart they were, what have you. So let's start remembering that the players play, in most conventions, or in a lot of conventions, the players paid to play, whether it's because they got a hotel room, they flew in, or they're actually paying money for your event. And it's supposed to be fun. So as a game master, think about making it fun. It's not just for you, it's for the players as well. And that's just general advice. So as I mentioned, there's multiple styles. You want this thing to appeal to different folks. You don't want it to appeal to just one individual play style if you can help it, so that the entire table gets a little bit of fun with those who like to role play versus those who like combat versus those who like puzzles. So timing and pacing, 3:45. Again, make sure do the event based, and then have extras for faster groups from a summary standpoint. Now, playtesting. Don't underestimate playtesting. Again, as I mentioned, the venture that you ran with your friends in the campaign does not count, because you're changing it, you're tweaking it, you're modifying it. And you want to do it because it's your rehearsal. It's the thing that lets you understand that the theory of the adventure works in practice. So if you think this thing is going to take a certain amount of time and it doesn't, because, players get stuck, they didn't see that clue, they never find the secret door. Well, maybe you want to change that so you don't worry about those sorts of things, that you give them the clue, or you make the secret door easier to find so that they can continue moving. So last thing I want to say too about that is, if you're using home rules or a new game system, you just got to play test it for sure, because you need to make sure that these things work right. And make sure you give the players, if you're doing house rules, give them that information too, so they know how you're going to run it. And then finally, it really gives you confidence if you put everything together. Because when I do convention events, right, you have the maps, you have the player sheets. I always do pre-gens. You have everything you need. I play a lot of Savage Worlds, so we're talking about bennies, we're talking about props. I have them all. I run them. I use them. And then I can say, hey, this felt right. I gave this prop out at the right time, or this map made sense to the players when they were working through it. So one of the examples that I use is the Lost Tower of Taladas, and this is a Dragonlance kind of based adventure. I haven't run this thing since 2001, but I ran it a lot in GenCon in the 90s. It was like 8 years, and it was well attended. A lot of people came. People waited in line. I don't know if it was because it was a great adventure or because there wasn't enough Dragonlance stuff at GenCon. I don't know, but people were there. But originally it was a open-ended kind of location-based. So there was a tower, and a tower had 22 floors. And you could go to any floor you wanted. You could go anywhere you wanted, and you go right up to the top to the master of the tower and find out that there's a good lich there, and he'll tell you that you can't go through the portal unless you do X, Y, and Z. And you could attack him if you wanted to. Sure, why not? But you could come and go in the tower and learn certain things, and if you didn't learn them and you wanted to come back, you could. Well, I had to turn that into an event, so drove from 22 floors of rooms that are going to take people 15 adventures to get through, to what's the key elements. Oh, it's to get the keys. There's some key conflicts that happen. You're going to run into a dragon, and he's going to try to do this, and and then you get to the top of the tower and meet the master, and now finally you've got what it takes to get through that portal and do what you need to do. So complete rewrite with just a great idea that I had for my campaign group. So I mentioned this, 22 floors, 7+ items. But I modified it, and I ripped it apart and then rebuilt it from scratch with just the nugget of that idea and what these different items were there. But have to make it so that it works with, again, different styles, different people, because my original had minimum exploration. You could just, again, bypass, do what you needed to do. And then I had a whole bunch of other adventures I was running at the time. Top Knots and Takesis was also a Dragonlance, also well done because that one used the principles. But South Park Beefcake, Dragomon, they failed miserably. In my mind, I think the players had a good time, but why did they fail? And this is, lessons learned. First, kind of gimmicky, didn't think through the house rules. I didn't play test the house rules I had well enough to find, to really learn that, again, D&D is useless for doing a, pitting two monsters against each other kind of combat. There's just not a balance there. So I learned that. I didn't have enough kind of adventure events for the South Park Beefcake. I was just, here's the town. And people were going all over and not following the threads that were put there because I wasn't, really putting those threads up front, making it easy for them to find. Playtesting helped solve some of these problems, but in reality, I felt like I didn't playtest them enough, and in the end, they weren't as fun as I wanted them to be. Now, recently, in the adventures that I've been writing, like the Helix Nebula situation, is this just another bug hunt? I've used these principles pretty successfully to really think through what it means to be an adventurer. Am I adventure Just Another Bug Hunt, there's actually a military installation, and there's multiple buildings, but I can help, if the players are getting stuck in buildings and they're trying to explore every little inch, I can help nudge them along with these events that I have happening that sort of pull them in the right direction if they're going too slow. If they're going too fast, well, then by all means, dig through the ancient artifacts and find that power suit that will help you later in the adventure. Each one can be tailored based on the group and how they're pacing. All part of what it takes to take a campaign adventure and turn it into a convention adventure. Again, summary: minimize insider knowledge. Think about those events, not just generic locations that PCs wander through. Make it standalone. Get rid of the backstory that they have to know. I mean, you can provide backstory and let them read, but you're not going to give them 5 paragraphs that is important, because they got to understand what happened to these player characters from first level to 20th level. Be prepared for the different play styles. There's so many of them. Of course, you can have the adventure written for a particular one, ask for that in the description, but it's always good to have that mix of combat and role play and puzzle solving and all the things based on what the different players like. And make sure that everybody gets a chance to shine, and that there's roles they're making, because there's a specialty that's just their own, or it's shared, but the party is splitting up to get things done. Like in the Helix Nebula situation on this spacecraft, people could split up and go do different things, and the different robots had some overlap in their abilities, because the repair robot may not be at every door. And so, the scientist has a little repair. He's knowledgeable enough a little bit in engineering to get done what he needs to get done. He's not as good, but he can do it if he has to. And then finally, playtest. One of the things is, when you're writing your hook, or you're writing what you need to do to get the players excited, what would you read? Trust your gut. I mean, you're going to conventions. What do you read to get you excited? What do you say, oh, this makes sense as something I want to do? Not just, hey, this is an adventure for a bunch of players in Dragonlance world. I really tried to say, get some intrigue, drop some names. The Dark Queen, oh my God, this is going to be epic. Then on Dragomon, I don't know, wasn't as good. But some other suggestions I have is bring all the materials for the players. Production values are cool. Use pre-gens. I mean, I know in some cases creating characters is easy based on, but pre-gens are so much better. Bring spell sheet lists. Don't just write on the sheet of paper they've got a magic missile. Give them the text of magic missile so they don't have to look things up and they can understand what they need to do. Know where your event is. Look ahead. That goes without saying. You be ready. You're the game master. You be ready to run this thing at the time. The players can just show up, get their character sheet, go, but you be ready. You have everything ready for them to go. You got bennies, have those bennies ready to hand out at the minute's notice when folks get there. And then I also say, bring printouts. Some people use laptops now to do their work. I always had multiple copies. I had some on a USB stick. I had the printout. I had everything. So if I had to go to Kinko's at the last minute to get it done, I could. And then last, this is controversial. Talk about DM roles. Or GM roles. I don't do this anymore. I roll completely out in the open because I play a lot of Savage Worlds, and people expect Savage Worlds to be kind of, crazy, over the top, fast, fun, and furious. And so why not roll in the front and let them see when the GM exploded his dice? But in some cases, in some systems, it's better to, roll a little bit behind the screen, especially if you're going to have to do that thing where you're pushing players forward, or you're, hanging back and adding new things because they're going too quickly. But it's controversial. What your style is your style. So some other things, they don't have these anymore, so this is kind of dated, but they used to sell spell cards, and I would just take those spell cards and hand them out. I'd list everything that the character needs on the character sheet, but that doesn't mean I list everything, the kitchen sink, but just what they need, and I make the character sheet as clean as possible so they can find what they need to find. I have the monsters detailed out. Again, I play a lot of Savage Worlds, and so it's easy to do. But just have that information. Don't go looking at the book. Just have it there, ready to go. And in some cases, just ignore it. Even nobody's going to care whether you know the exact stat block of your monster or not. Don't ask for the sheets back. Give it to the players. If you got 5 events, print out 5 copies. And then the normal things, know how many people are signed up so that if you got people coming with generics, they can play as 2 as well. And if you got miniatures, don't just throw them on the table. Really use them. Let the players touch them, feel them. I don't use a lot of miniatures, but I have maps that I put out that people can, draw lines on, put text on, whatever they want, to let people know what they're doing. And then last but not least, this is why I started running events, because I was so sick of starting late. GM didn't show up. I never got a chance. I mean, there was adventures where I would just sit there and wait for my turn to do stuff. I'd have to interject myself through role playing, but my character had certain skills, but my skills were never a need. So I played a game at a convention where they sort of did a play off of Oak Island, and I was a demolitions expert, and I was, sort of the guy who, was mechanically inclined. There's just like nothing, all the puzzles were, puzzles that you had to solve as a player. They really weren't puzzles. There was no time when demolition was even even a possibility to take a chance of. So I felt useless. Dying too early, sometimes it's fun to die in a, blaze of glory, but if that happens at hour 2 out of 4 hours, maybe not. And don't cancel your events. You're signing up to do them. Maybe you're nervous. Maybe if you're getting sick, send a friend in your place to let people know at least, but try not to cancel events. And then I had some tips back in the day where, I would walk through and do that jump cut, make sure everybody declares what they're intending on doing so that I can walk. I used to walk around the table. Literally I would walk around the table so I could hear people, so I could ask them. I never let people dominate the table. I made sure I was heard by everyone. And then I let everybody know up front what the special rules were. I would take that 30 minutes to explain how Savage Worlds works, what's the key things that they need to know. And then I made time for bio breaks, part of your pacing, part of your timing, all that sort of thing. Questions? Well, you can't answer questions. I don't remember back in 2003-04 when I ran this thing, what the questions were. I'm sure they were thoughtful and provoking, but I do not remember what they are. So some of this probably didn't ring true. You said, well, that's like old school thinking. I don't know. But this was something that I decided to do at a GenCon way back when. It was fun to do. I think the people in attendance learned something, at least the ones who came up and talked to me after and said that was kind of an interesting take on things, especially since, again, it's not how do I design a Gen Con event, or a convention event. It's how do I take my campaign, cool thing that happened in my campaign, and turn it into an event for a convention. So, this was Carl again. I appreciate everybody watching. Hopefully it was interesting to you, and it was fun. Again, it was a fun thing, and I appreciate people watching and putting up with me walking through some nostalgia. So again, this was Carl Davis with Tabletop Tango, and appreciate you guys watching.
Hobby with imagination, fighting for imaginary nations. Grab your book and